All right. Good afternoon to everyone. Nice to see another full room. So I'm going to start off with it's a trick question, right? Because if I ask you what's the most important commandment in the Torah, the official answer is, of course, always going to be no commandment's more important than any other commandment. All the commandments are equally important. God wouldn't give us an unimportant commandment, etc., etc., etc. However, that's not 100% all the answer, right? Because we know that there are hierarchies of choices and decisions sometimes when there are conflicts of different commandments. So, for example, if I were to tell you that you either have to eat bacon or else you die, what's your decision?
Eat bacon.
Eat bacon, exactly. By the way, that has to be an actual either medical opinion or somebody pointing a gun at you. You can't just feel like you're going to die without bacon. That's not an excuse. It's just Rabbi Neely said if I felt like I needed bacon, I could. No, that's not what I'm saying. So there are a certain hierarchy, and if we were to work that hierarchy up, eventually when we get to the very, very top, we get three cardinal transgressions that are absolutely inviolate, even under the pain of death. We would rather die than violate them. They are? Oh, what's that?
Kill and rape.
Kill. Okay, so I'm going to use the word murder because it's a little bit clearer. Murder is killing outside of the law. And so murder is absolutely one of the things. If someone comes to you and says, if you don't murder somebody once a week, you'll die, it's better to die, right? And it's not really something that has happened often, but it has happened. Not the once a week thing, but absolutely we have been put in positions where Romans or others, oppressors throughout the ages have said, you kill that innocent person or else I kill you. And under those circumstances, we are supposed to say, kill me, right? I would rather die than be a murderer. Very different than the bacon story, yes? Very good. And you mentioned another one. Well, I'm going to use there's like one term for it in Hebrew, but it's not really a one-word. Sexual immorality, which usually covers things like incest, adultery, etc. Right? So some of the edges can be a little bit blurry, but sexual immorality is another thing where if they say, I want you to go, have sex with that other person's wife, you're supposed to say, I'll take the bullet, right? Rather than do that. Okay, well, those are the two biggies. What's the third? Idolatry. You can guess which one we're going to talk about today. And one of the reasons we're talking about it is precisely because even though our tradition puts these three on the same level, for most people, there's two of them up here where we can imagine ourselves taking a bullet rather than murdering someone. We can imagine ourselves taking a bullet rather than sleeping with a relative, But idolatry? If it's the difference between life or death and all I have to do is, wada in front of an idol, does that really, one of these things is not like the other, right? Especially because there's a victim here, Who's the victim? Right? It doesn't trigger the same response within us as the first two do, which perhaps is why of these three, guess which prohibition gets more screen time in the Torah? Idolatry. Right? The Torah tells us not to murder a couple times. I guess it doesn't need to reinforce the prohibition on murder because it sort of understands that we're going to innately get it, right? Our gut is going to tell us murdering another person to save your own life is the kind of thing that you're not supposed to do. But the idolatry thing, that God is going to hammer home. And in the interest of helping God do the hammering, we're going to hammer it today. Good? Good. So we are in Parashat Vaetchanan, and today we're going to start with chapter 4, which is page 1006. So it's chapter 4, and we're going to start off with verse 1. That's a lot of rain.
Yes.
But that's why Florida's green and we have lakes everywhere. You don't want rain, go to California and see what brown looks like. Not talking about UPS. Okay, would you be willing?
Yes, I will.
Okay. You're going to have to be louder over the rain, yeah.
And now, O Israel, give heed to the laws and rules that I am instructing you to observe, so that you may live to enter and occupy the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add anything to what I command you, or take anything away from it, but keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin upon you. You saw with your own eyes what the Lord did in the matter of Baal Peor, that the Lord your God wiped out from among you every person who followed Baal Peor, while you, who held fast to the Lord your God, are all alive today.
All right, so general statement to begin with, which is I've given you a bunch of commandments. That's all I'm asking you to do. Don't change them. Don't take away. Don't do anything else. And you can have already seen the advantage, right? You walk in my ways, life is good. You forsake my ways, life is bad. It's a nice general introduction, the type of which we get in many places in the Torah. Make sense? Good. Onward. Oh, are we getting a little condensation drip? Yeah, the AC sometimes gets a little overwhelmed when there's too much moisture. Thank you. And now we'll get the lovely rhythm.
See, I have imparted to you laws and rules, as the Lord my God has commanded me, for you to abide by in the land you are about to enter and occupy. Observe them faithfully, for that will be proof of your wisdom and discernment to other peoples, who on hearing of all these laws will say, surely that great nation is a wise and discerning people. But what great nation is there that has a God so close at hand as the Lord our God whenever we call upon him? Or what great nation has laws and rules as perfect as all this teaching that I set before you this day?
Right, so one of the great statements of what is the glory of Judaism? It's not the fact that we've got big muscles. It's not the fact that we've got lovely hair or had. It is the fact that we have great laws, right? And our laws are a testament to the divinity of their origin, right? That you can't find a law this perfect just made up by regular people. And that is part of their proof. And for us, this is our crown, right? The Torah is the crown of the Jewish people. So why are we great? Because we have a great Torah. It's also a good reminder that innately, as far as, blood and bones and all of that, there's nothing so great about us. It is what we carry, the Torah, that actually elevates us as a people. Did you have a comment, question? Oh, okay. This is a long introduction, but trust me, it's going somewhere.
But take utmost care and watch yourselves scrupulously, so that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, and so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and make them known to your children and to your children's children.
All right, so what in particular are we talking about? The things we want to make sure we remember, the things we saw with our own eyes, the things we want to pass on to our generation. That is a huge body of potential items. And now God wants to narrow it down of what he really wants us to hold on to.
The day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb.
Horeb is the synonym for Mount Sinai.
When the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, so that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, and may so teach their children. He came forward and stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with densest clouds. The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but a voice. He declared to you the covenant that he commanded you to observe, the 10 Commandments, and he inscribed them on 2 tablets of stone. At the same time, the Lord commanded me to impart to you laws and rules for you to observe in the land that you are about to cross into and occupy.
Okay, so we've got what we saw with our own eyes. We've got a memory we want to preserve, and we want to give it to the kids, right? When you go on vacation, how do you handle these things? What do you do if you go on vacation?
Picture.
Right, you take a picture, right? That's like one of the first things you would do. If you go on vacation, you're visiting somewhere, you know, really special to you, and you want to keep it as a memory and you want to be able to show it to your kids, you're going to whip out that camera or phone now and go click. Now, yes? Or souvenir, because I can't remember how to spell the rest of it.
But you totally have a picture of a cloud and some fire. You know, but you tell the story.
Okay, so, and you also have a story. But,
yes, but show a picture, they say, what are you looking at? The cloud talking?
but the great thing about a picture or a souvenir is even if you don't have the story, it conveys some of the meaning, right? I mean, I may not know why you took the picture of that burny, cloudy mountain, but it's cool and it's impressive, and I can see why that was impressing you, even if I don't know what the content was without the story. And the same thing with a souvenir, right? When your parents bring you back a T-shirt that says, you know, my parents went to the Grand Canyon and all they brought me was this T-shirt.
Yes.
You at least know they went to the Grand Canyon. You know there is something called a Grand Canyon, and every time you wear that T-shirt, you think about your parents, you think about the story they told you about the Grand Canyon. It helps, right? This is why we take pictures. This is why we have souvenirs, and then hopefully strap a story to it. And this is why God is telling us right now the next few sentences.
For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Lord your God spoke to you about Sinai out of the fire, not to act wickedly and not make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness whatever, a form of a man or a woman.
All right, we're going to come back to all the forms in just a second. But what did God just do? God said, no pictures, please. No souvenirs. Right? Absolutely not. Put down the camera, you in the front row. Right? All right. This is like one of those concerts where they tell you, you know, no one's allowed to pull their cell phone out and try and videotape the concert. No, we're not doing, you know, cell phone. No selfie at Mount Sinai. This is me and God. You know, the fire behind me. You know, and look, I've got a little fake 10 Commandments over here. Look, I'm holding up the mountain. Right? No pictures, no souvenirs. When God is saying no idols, it seems to be here that what God is saying is no idols of God. Normally when we think of idols, it was like I joked in the beginning, it's like blah, 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 I'm going to bow down to the idol of some other God. This is also telling us through this read, and we're going to find there's a little bit of debate on this, what else is new, through this debate, that we're not just supposed to not worship idols about other gods, we're not supposed to make idols of our God. Right? We don't normally think of it like that. Right? We normally think of idols like Zeus and Baal and Aphrodite and all of that. But this is saying, don't make an idol and call it Adonai and call it God. Because no pictures, no souvenirs. Even though you had the most awesome experience of your life, there's no gift store. I know, it breaks the Florida law that you always exit through the gift store, but there is no gift store for Mount Sinai. It's not quite an official law. It's the unwritten law. They charge you at the entrance. They charge you at the exit. It just seems balanced. God is telling us there is no gift store for Sinai. And that seems wrong. Because we all know intuitively that if I take pictures and I get souvenirs, I will preserve the memory of that event better than if I don't. Right? Think of the places you went to that you didn't take pictures or get souvenirs. Can you remember any? Right? Maybe a few, little fuzzy, right? Because memory is not so good, not just because you get to a certain age, but even when you're young, we're constantly rewriting our memories over and over again to keep them fresh. And if we don't, a few details change here and there. A nice photo that I can take out and look at and say, that's the house I grew up in, is going to keep the accuracy of my memory much sharper than if I don't have that picture. The T-shirt that says, you know, Summer Camp 2005 is going to really help me remember that I went to the summer camp in 2005, that I was in the bunk number 4, and you know this guy was sleeping below me and that guy was above. If I have the T-shirt, it will help reinforce that memory over and over again. And I won't think, what was it? Was that 2004, 2008? When did I meet that guy? The t-shirt will help. And yet God's telling us no.
The other thing is, if you take pictures of something, it helps you remember it more accurately. Because 20 years later, you think you saw it one way, the other person saw it another way.
Exactly.
It's more accurate, huh?
And yet God's telling us no. Right? This is like, he told us he wants to preserve the memory of what we saw with our own eyes so we can pass it on to our kids, and he's getting rid of two of the main things that would help us do that.
It's a test.
It's a test. Like God just wants to give us a test
Yeah.
to see what? Whether we can do it with one hand tied behind our back?
Kind of, yeah.
So possibly. It could be whether God wants to make it harder for us to transmit Torah. Doesn't exactly sound like what God would want to do, because it's hard enough for us to transmit Torah in any circumstances. Why make it even harder by getting rid of something we could use? Right? Imagine if I said you can teach Torah to your kids, but you're not allowed to use any illustrations. It's going to make it harder. So what did the tabernacle look like? Well, what do you mean the goat was caught by its horns in a bush? Well, you got a bush over here, and the horns are stuck. Nope, you have to sit on your hands while teaching. If I had to do that, I would go crazy. Why make it harder?
They didn't want to limit our vision of God.
Unless there is something about these that, when it comes to God, is a problem. Right? Taking a picture of the Grand Canyon, no problem. Getting a souvenir from when you visit Israel, wonderful, highly recommend. There's a trip next summer with Temple Israel. But there's something about these, when mixed with God, that makes it counterproductive, that actually destroys the message God is trying to teach. Right? If you've ever heard the phrase, the medium is the message. Well, there are certain mediums for the message of God that actually ruin the message of God. And that is what we call idolatry. So even if we're not talking about worshiping other gods that happen to look like statues, what we're saying here is that even if you were worshiping the true God, you're absolutely talking about Mount Sinai, and you're absolutely talking about the one God, creator of heaven and earth, the God who took us out of Egypt, and he's right over here, folks, right over here in this lovely golden statue, you have made a huge error. One for which you should have rather have passed your life into the next world than to have committed. It's not just I took a picture, took a souvenir. Okay, so let's finish off with what God tells us not to do, because the list is really, really important. And then we'll get to our commentator about why all this is so important in the eyes of our sages.
Don't act wickedly, and don't make for yourself a sculptured image in any likeness whatever, the form of a man or a woman, the form of any beast on earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form of anything that creeps on the ground, the form of any fish that is in the waters below the earth. And when you look up to the sky and behold the sun and the moon and the stars, the whole heavenly host, you must not be lured into bowing down to them or serving them. These the Lord your God allotted to other peoples everywhere under heaven. But you, the Lord took and brought you out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be his very own people, as is now the case.
Okay, so a lot going on there. So first of all, the list looks a little randomish, right? Right? No people, no beasts, no wings, no fish, no creepy things. And when you look up at the sky and you see the sun, the moon, the star, not that either. Do it backwards. Mm-hmm. Right? What is at the very end of the list? Everything that's up in the heavenly host, the sun, the moon, the stars. What comes after that? The waters, the things that are in the waters, the things that creep on the ground.
It's the reverse of creation.
It's the reverse of creation. Right? This is the opposite of the 7 days of creation. So the first thing mentioned in our list, humanity. What is the last thing that's made in creation? Humanity. The last thing on our list, the heavens above. What is one of the first things made in creation? The heavens above, right? And it's actually in order. This is an implicit reminder that idolatry undoes creation, undoes the purpose of creation. Right? Idolatry itself is basically saying if you're worshiping idols, the world might as well have not been made. Additionally, it's saying everything from A to Z that is created cannot be used as a symbol for the creator. And that's harder for us to digest, right? Everything that's created cannot be used as a symbol, as a reminder of the creator. Doesn't mean it can't inspire us, doesn't mean it can't guide us, but as soon as we hold it up as a physical representation of the creator, now we're in trouble and the world might as well have not have been made. That's the level that idolatry is condemned in this text, and how carefully it was constructed. Now, at the very end, it says that God took us from where?
Egypt.
From Egypt. But Egypt gets a very interesting little title here. The blast furnace, right? What is a blast? What is an iron furnace for?
Melted iron.
And what do you do when the iron's melted? What?
Create new things.
Create new things. How?
Molding.
I heard someone say the word
Molding?
mold. Very dramatic. I had to wait for just the right moment. Right? What do you do with molten iron? You cast it in the form of something else. Right? That's how you make an idol, a metal idol at least. Right? You take it, you make a mold, you pour in the molten metal, bam, you've got your idol. We were taken from a furnace. Where were we? We are now cast, right? We have become the symbol for God. No idol statue. We were cast. We were pulled out of the furnace, out of Egypt, and we were poured into a mold. What shape is that mold? Remember, we got in our long introduction, there was a very heavy emphasis on something.
We were made in the
Well, we were made an image of God just by being alive, but there's a very specific image that the Jewish people have been made into. What shape do we occupy in the world? Torah, right? We fit a Torah-shaped mold, right? We were pulled out of Egypt as molten metal, as a nation in flux, a nation that was, unsure of what its future was. God took us to Mount Sinai and poured us into the mold of the mountain. That doesn't mean we're shaped like mountains. It means we're shaped like Torah, which is what Mount Sinai represents. And that, remember God said, will be the symbol of your wisdom, of your greatness, of your glory, will be the laws that I've given you. Right? So God doesn't need an idol because he's got us. Right? You want to know God's great? Look around at the Jewish people. Don't look at a big statue. That's where you can see the imprint of God in the world most clearly, because that was the idol that God forged for himself, and he doesn't want any other. Because anything else displaces that. Right? As soon as you set up a golden statue, people stop looking at the people. As soon as you set up a golden statue, people stop looking at the laws. And now that has become the focus rather than what was meant to be the focus. And what was meant to be the focus was, as we said very astutely early on, the story, meaning the commandments, the teaching. That was the focus of how we're supposed to transmit this. Because it is the people that matter, not the statue. Which is why God cannot be replaced by a statue, and why if you replace God with a statue and stop telling the story, stop telling the wisdom, stop telling the teaching, why did God bother? Right? Because people are saying God's name in fancy songs? No, the only thing God wanted for us to remember, for us to pass on, was the story of the covenant, of the laws, of the way that we were going to live, because that was the glory we're supposed to carry, not any statue. Make sense? Yeah.
You said it's the people, or is it the traditions that the people pass down? Because we have some black stains.
We have some people, as well as some of the ways that we've behaved, that are not to God's credit. Absolutely. But we have recovered and repaired from those types of issues. Very often. So nothing was ever about us being perfect, which is why the Tanakh includes all the stories of all of our mistakes, rather than trying to make it sound like King David and everyone else was all, perfect all the time. Because it is our ability to overcome our imperfections and to use Torah and the guidance that God has given us to do better. That is the ultimate essence of Torah. And the ultimate essence of Torah is not, this is the perfect mark, and then how close can you get? It's, this is the tool that helps you get to as higher and higher level. So the Torah is not only the goal, it's also the technique. And so even when we're making mistakes, the technique is still what's going to redeem us.
So it seems like the image would be the technique, not the people.
But it's the people who embody the technique. Otherwise, we wouldn't still be here. And that, I mean, literally, that if we had forsaken the entire technique, if we'd forsaken Torah completely, the Jewish people would no longer exist. I mean, it doesn't say we physically wouldn't exist, but we wouldn't exist as the Jewish people. And what we believe and what we teach and what we share with the world would no longer be taught or shared. It would just have disappeared into history, like every other ancient society. Okay, so.
I also find very interesting that after 5,000 years, we haven't improved on those rules. Many societies don't kill, don't steal. All that time back, God gave us the exact, told us, told us how to live. That it's still today. It's not obsolete. It's not. You don't need to add anything. Right. You don't need to take anything away. It's
and there are many parts of the world
that haven't learned it.
That haven't caught on to all of the points. Right. And there, you have to remember in the United States even. There were many times when only in the last century, last 50 years, many of the main points of Torah were still not being adhered to in basic things as how do you treat a criminal? How do you treat a thief? What grounds are necessary for the execution of somebody? Even that, they were hanging people publicly in England for theft in the 1950s. A little bit earlier than that, I believe, but it still, you could be killed, for property theft very, very late. Well, if you're going to go all about like that, what was always the favorite thing to do to cattle rustlers and all those Western movies that we used to love as kids? Yeah, hang them. But did you just hang them? No, you lynched them. You didn't have a judge. You didn't have a jury. You caught some guy stealing your cows. You took them to a tree and you hung them with a rope. And we said, yay, cowboys, when that happened, because they were hanging the bad guys. And Torah, 3,000 years prior, was saying that is revolting, absolutely disgusting that you would kill somebody over property. Right? To kill somebody over a human life, of course, you have to defend yourself, defend your families, and all of that. But to kill someone over property, especially without even having justice, that was repulsive from God's teaching 3,000 years ago, and it took America a very long time to catch up. And it's taken other places in the world till the present day. I don't think that we're not all there yet. Okay, so what is it about this idolatry that is so corrosive and so bad? That's where we're going to go, because we're now going to enter this mix of whether or not this section in chapter 4 is talking about worshiping God with an idol or worshiping with idols at all. And so we're going to see comments that reflect both opinions, because our commentators disagree. Would you be willing to begin as we're on the page that begins with "You shall not make yourself"? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I am. That's where we're starting. Yes.
You shall not make for yourself an idol, literally a carving. I might think that he may not make one that projects, but he may want to make one that's flat.
All right. So what are we doing here? And you'll be able to sort of pick up the pace once we get the feel for this. This is the classic Midrash technique taken from Mechilta here, one of the earliest strains of Midrash, where they're trying to explain why was a section of the Torah or sections worded the way they were worded. It's because if you lacked those words, you might have come to an alternative and wrong conclusion. So that's why we're going to get this repetition of you might think, but you'd be wrong because we've got this part of the verse. And then you might think, but you'd be wrong because we've got this part of the verse. So we're going to go through ruling out a whole bunch of options. But what this Midrash is going to be driving home to us is the fact that God did not want there to be any doubt of what was included when it came to idolatry.
So therefore it says, don't make any likeness. I might think that he may not make a flat one, but that he may make a planting.
Maybe I can't actually carve something, but either down or projecting. But what if I plant a tree and then I'm going to worship the tree?
Therefore, Deuteronomy says, you shall not plant for yourself an Asherah.
Which is the term that was used for these trees that were worshipped in the ancient world, all over the place.
Yeah. I might think no plants, but that he may make one of wood.
Right, so cut down the tree, don't have it be alive, and I'll just take a stick and I'll worship that.
Therefore, it says any wood.
Okay.
I might think no wood, but he might make one out of stone. So therefore, Leviticus says, not and a covering stone. I might think no stone, but he may make one out of silver. So Exodus says, no gods of silver. I might think no silver, but he might make one of gold. Therefore, Exodus says, no gods of gold. I might think no gold, but he may make one of copper or tin or lead. Therefore, Exodus says, molten gods you shall not make for yourself. I might think he may not make for himself the likeness of all these, but he may make one of any form.
Right. So what he's saying here, because the Hebrew doesn't come through clearly in the translation, is maybe I can't make like a picture, but maybe I can actually make a shape. Right. I can carve it. And so it's three-dimensional rather than two-dimensional. Maybe God only is upset with pictures, but doesn't mind sculpture.
I was looking, there was an advertisement in the paper, an article on the beautiful kind of architectural furniture that people are putting in their homes now. And one of the most gorgeous things they have is this very high thing. It's a totem pole, and it has piled on it these images of the various gods, but it's artistic.
Right.
And I look, now I know, I can't put that in my house, can I?
It's actually a little more complicated than that.
Even worse than that.
No. I mean, if it is a artistic reproduction or not actually an item of worship, then there is potential for allowing it as the same way that you can have a painting on the wall. On the other hand, if it is an actual item that was intended and is structured to be an item of worship, then yes, you'd be in trouble.
So you don't think I might be sort of heading myself into trouble by looking at this, that eventually...
Well, let's finish this, because this text is going to finish off with the question of what does it mean to be heading in the wrong direction.
So that's where it says, lest you corrupt yourselves and make of any form.
Right, which is what we just had in Deuteronomy
Yes.
4.
I might think that he may not make one of any form of a human being, but that he may make one of the likeness of an animal or a beast or a bird. Therefore, it says, don't make the figure of any beast, etc. Okay, I might think no likeness of all of these, but that he might make the likeness of a fish or hoppers or reptiles and creeping things. Therefore, it says, anything that creeps on the ground. I might think none of those, but that he might make the likeness of the sun, the moon, the stars, the constellations. Therefore, it says, and lest you lift your eyes to the heavens. I might think that he may make none of those, but he may make the likeness of angelic entities. Therefore, it says of above, no likeness of angelic entities. I might think that he may not make in the waters beneath the earth. That would be to include reflected images. These are the words of Rabbi Akiva. So far did the Holy One, blessed be he, pursue the Yetzer Hara to give it no pretext for permissiveness.
All right, so our Yetzer Hara, our base instinct, our base desire is we want a picture. We want the souvenir. We want the take home from this amazing experience. And we would keep thinking of, well, God only said none of these, but that means this might be okay. So therefore, throughout the Torah, God is constantly heading us off at the pass to make sure we don't end up thinking that we've discovered a loophole, but let's just bring home that souvenir.
Just go back to the story of Abraham and Lot, where Lot, his eyes, he sees something that looks wonderful, and so his eyes deceive him and end up leading him off.
Down in the Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah.
Right. So this is this idea that our eyes can lead us in the wrong way. We see something, oh, that's pretty, and this can.
Right. But not just our ideas, but our eyes, but our ideas and our desires founded good, right? God says, your eyes have seen this, you should remember it and teach it to your kids. And the first thing we're going to think of doing is making a picture, making a souvenir. And God says, no, you can't make any pictures. Well, I can't make a picture. Can I make a sculpture? But you only said no wooden sculptures. Can I make a stone sculpture? Right? It's anybody who's ever argued with a small child knows that they'll say, but you didn't say I couldn't make it out of paper. And so God is making sure that he said, no, he doesn't do this every place, which again, this excessive amount of prohibiting to prevent our Yetzer Hara is telling us two things. One, God really, really, really doesn't want idols. And two, our Yetzer Hara really, really, really does.
Right.
Right? Because if we didn't have the desire for these things, God wouldn't be telling us so much about how to prevent us from doing them. Right? It's like nowhere in the Torah does God tell us, don't jump off cliffs explicitly. Right? Don't jump off high cliffs, don't jump off small cliffs, don't jump off sea cliffs, don't jump off desert. No, God doesn't have to tell us all that because no one wants to throw themselves off a cliff, or at least not in great numbers. But idols is something everybody wants and is looking for a way that we can do it without actually breaking the commandment. And so God is making sure that there is no way for us to make an object that we're going to worship that doesn't break this commandment. Yes.
I seem to recall a young child whose we were going to a house for dinner.
Mhm.
And they stopped and they said, can we go there? Because the house
I'm trying to remember.
had Hawaiian tiki
Oh,
cloths.
They had a lot of idols from their trips to Hawaii. Yes.
And literally we had to stop because it was like,
It was a little overwhelming. I mean, it wasn't like, a souvenir on the shelf. It was
there was like
lots of them.
But didn't the other nations of the world think there was something wrong with us, that we're worshiping this, I don't know, something?
Of course.
that nobody
It's
worships?
bizarre. Like I
It's
said,
very bizarre.
our human nature wants the souvenir,
Something
wants the
concrete.
picture, wants the concrete.
Yeah.
And that's not just our human nature as Jews. It's the human nature of all humans, of which we are a part.
And yet,
I have a question, it's a little bit different. But my friend called me yesterday because she's going through her mother's things.
Hmm.
And her mother left her a big medallion with Taurus on it. So she
Ah.
wants to know, should she get rid of it? Should she bury it? What should she
Right.
do with it?
So for horoscope things, the usual case is if the person who owned it worshipped the object, then yes, it should be disposed of. If the person who owned it wore it because they were proud of when they were born, or they just thought horoscopes were fun, or those kinds of things, then it's just a decorative element and not a problem.
I told her just to pawn it, you know.
So- Well, it depends on whether it was significant, and if it was a significant memento for the family, then that might be emotional reasons to hold on to it. But if the parent actually worshipped, the constellation and really believed this had power, and we're going to talk about constellations in a little bit, then yeah, that's something that should be removed. But if it is something that the parents never took seriously as
She has it
being,
hanging in her garage now. She took it out the house.
that's a good step while she tries to figure out what role it played in her parents' religious faith.
Yeah.
All right, onward, or we'll never finish because there's too many words today.
it is as if one were to say to his neighbor, take great care lest you fall into the hole that you are in danger of falling into. That means, in the beginning it was stated, for where is there a nation so great, whose God is so close to it, as the Lord our God in all our callings to him?
Remember how we read that just a few verses ago?
Now one might be caused to err by this, and to impute some link or bond to the Blessed One, and so come to attribute to his divinity some corporeal elements.
Right? Well, if God is so close to us, then that means there must be something us-like about God. Right? There's a link. And so if God is near to me, then that means I must be near to God. And if I'm flesh and blood, if I'm solid, if I have eyes, if I have a hand, then that means God might have those things too.
And if I'm linked to him, the link is on me, the link has to be on him. So there must be something corporeal that can link.
Exactly.
to.
Now you might think, but the closer you get to God, the easier it should be to avoid this kind of stupidity.
Yeah.
But the truth is, not necessarily, right? Because the closer you get to God, the more you think you and God have in common. And that makes this kind of slip more likely to a certain extent. If you believe God is so super transcendent and unconnected and uninterested in the human world, because God is just the prime creator who did like a snap of his fingers at the Big Bang, and that was it, you probably think you and God have nothing in common. But if you imagine God as being your best buddy pal that you're talking to all the time and really, really familiar with, then you start thinking of God as having a mouth, and you start thinking of God as having ears, and you start thinking of God as having stuff. And it makes God relatable, but it also makes idolatry plausible. And that's the problem. Onward.
For this reason it is stated, though you witness this always, take heed to yourselves and heed your souls exceedingly, lest you forget that exalted encounter in which the Blessed One came closer to his creations than he had ever come before, or than he will ever come thereafter. And still, this did not result in your witnessing any form that you could attribute to him, for he does not have one. But you heard only a voice of words alone, which was a created voice and not a voice emanating from God himself.
Right. We're going to come back to that in just a second, but I want to make sure, why is he tying in this idea of the vision at Sinai? Well, because what Ron is trying to do here is link all the different threads that we have in that long introduction through this prohibition on idolatry to say this is all one long speech with one purpose, which is to say, God said, I know we're going to be close, and you're going to be like really, really happy about that, but think about the time when you and me, we were closest, right? Mount Sinai. Did you see anything that looked like me then? Did you? No? Good. Remember that. Because you're going to want to, because we're going to be so close, you're going to want to think that I'm more like you than I am, and you're going to want to make statues or something. But if you remember back to when we were really, really closest, and you looked and you didn't see anything, that should remind you that I don't have a shape. Right? So that's why God brings that whole reminder of the vision at Mount Sinai. It's not just to say, I gave you Torah and you should follow my laws. It's to say, while you were getting Torah, you didn't see nothing. In fact, you only heard something, and what you heard wasn't even the words coming out of like my mouth. God forbid you think I actually have lips and tongue and a voice box. Those were words that I created that you would hear, not words that I generated using some organ of speech. Make sense? Okay, onward.
You only heard the sound of words, etc. The words, the sound of words, may be best understood in connection with Shir HaShirim Rabbah in Song of Songs, where it says, may he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. The Midrash explained that every utterance of God during the revelation at Mount Sinai resulted in the creation of an angel who would stand by each Israelite and ask him, are you willing to accept me? That is, the respective one of the 10 commandments of saying, and what other sub-commandments it contained.
All right, just for a moment, I know the sentence got a little clunky, but think of the beauty that was just described there, right? As God is giving the commandments, is giving the Torah, it's as though when he speaks, an angel is formed, right? Not sound waves, but an angelic messenger to each and every one of us as we stand there that comes and whispers in our ear, will you accept me, the angel being the commandment? Right? Will you accept me as being part of your life? Will you accept this commandment? That's God kissing us with his mouth, right? His mouth to our mouth is his angel flowing into us if we are willing to accept. Make sense? Good. Slightly off topic. Notice, by the way, the angel wants to get consent before initiating physical contact. All right? That's good advice in the dating scene.
Willing, right, to accept. The Israelite in question would answer in the affirmative, whereupon the angel would embrace and kiss him. The words, the sound of the words, is a reference to these questions the angels asked the Israelites. I explained that the only words the Israelites heard from the mouth of God directly were the first 2 commandments. This is a long-standing debate among the sages of exactly how much all of us heard and how much we heard only through Moses because we chickened out. Which if you go back to that part of the book of Exodus, the people basically saying, whoa, we can't handle this. Our brains are starting to melt. You go talk to God, Moses, and you bring it back to us. They were physically unable to comprehend the other 8, though God uttered them simultaneously. Right, so Or HaChaim, his opinion is that all 10 commandments flowed out simultaneously. All the angels were flowing up against us, and the first 2 we could handle, and then we just overload, shut down, and Moses had to carry the rest of them.
Actually 14 commandments, right? But they're like 10 utterances, right?
It depends how you divide up the verses. So we traditionally divide them into 10, as the Torah itself describes the 10 utterances. And when we read it formally, we divide it so that they will be in blocks that will add up to 10. But within each one, there are sub-commandments. That's what is being referred to here. So it's like when all the commandments regarding worshiping other gods, there are, sub-commandment A, sub-commandment B, sub-commandment C. So yes, you can add up the number of commanding grammar of orders and get to more than 10. But those additional orders are part of the overall commandment rather than separate commandments by our count. And by the Torah's own count, which also describes it as being 10. So the first 2 commandments the people heard directly from the mouth of God. The other 8 were turned into angels. When the souls returned to the Israelite bodies at the time, they heard those commandments from the angels. Right, so we heard those first 2, God and us, directly, because our souls were almost like detached. But then when we were melting, we basically stepped back. Moses took over the rest, but the angels then came to us and whispered externally. But we're not hearing it from God as directly as we did when we had that full-on immersion in the spiritual experience for the first 2. All right. I think I just blew everyone's mind, but that's okay. Let's move on back to idolatry.
It said you saw no image, only a voice. You only heard a voice. The voice was not seen. I have already explained the passage, and all the people saw the thunder.
So Ibn Ezra wants to make sure, in case you have somebody who wants to split hairs and says, but doesn't it say that people saw the sound? Like, no.
Original,
What?
in the original.
Yep. Back in
Mount
Exodus.
Sinai,
Yeah, exactly.
it says that they saw a voice.
But it says they
Olim
saw,
et hakolot.
exactly, they saw the kolot, they saw the voices, they saw the sound. And that, Ibn Ezra explains, doesn't mean they saw a physical sound. It means that their sensory experience was overloaded and not coming through the regular sense organs. That's the usual commentary. So you shouldn't think there was a physical sound that their eyes were on that represented God, or else we'd have idols of sound waves. And again, no physical representation allowed.
So it says you saw the thunder, but you did not see an image. How can we understand Moses referring to an image by contrasting it with a sound? It seems quite obvious that if one did not see an image, that one heard was only a sound.
Right? Again, trying to tease out in standard commentary fashion, apparent redundancy. If I tell somebody you only heard a sound, do I have to tell them that they didn't see an image? Right? Or if I say you heard my commandments and you didn't see an image, do I have to then also say, but you heard a sound? It seems excessive. And the Torah is not excessive.
You may understand this in conjunction with what I explained in the last verse, that the Israelites saw an angel who communicated God's words, that is, communicated the sound to the Israelite. This is also a way that the Mechilta explains the words, the whole people saw the voices. That's in Exodus.
Yeah, which is the verse that Yerach was talking about.
Moses was afraid that the Israelites would think that the angel whom they had seen was the God of Israel. He therefore had to underline that all the Israelites saw, in addition to the voices described in that verse, were the angels described by the Midrash. They most certainly did not see God.
All right, so here's another point of very easy confusion, which is if what actually happened was the angels gave us the last 8, then I might have thought that those angels were actually God. And therefore, Moses has to say, you saw no image of God, you only heard the voices, and those voices weren't God. Right? The transmitter at that point of the information were angels, absolutely doing what God wanted and bringing the message God wanted, but don't think that what you saw was actually God. And that problem of attributing the intermediate step between ourselves and God with divinity is one of the underlying causes of idolatry. Right? Because we've got, God up here. I'm not going to draw a picture for obvious reasons, right? And we've got humanity down here. This is on a spiritual scale, not meant to be physical. And we have things that communicate for us. Now, for us nowadays, the main thing we get is Torah. But Or HaChaim is talking about the angels in his day. At other times, we also, of course, had prophets. And the thing is, we can sort of relate to, especially this side over here, those things. And because we can relate to it, it's pretty easy to start thinking maybe these are God. Or maybe I should worship this. But we have to remember all of this are really coming from God, and they are just intermediate steps. Right? The person who brings you, the mailman who brings you the love letter from your beloved doesn't get your kiss. It's just the mailman. Just the form of delivery. And if you confuse the person who brings the love letter with the person who actually wrote the love letter, you're going to end up in a romantic comedy. And, it's a very silly movie. Yeah. Okay. Onward.
So form is something that would reflect the belief of those who hold that every perishable, ephemeral phenomenon in this world has a counterpart in the celestial regions which it is derived from. And that people made themselves replicas of what they thought the original looked like.
All right, Sforno, to come back to our topic of constellations and zodiac and all of that, he knew lots of people, and some still exist, but it was much more common, who said, okay, so let's imagine that there is an angel up here that, is one of God's servants. Well, down here, there must be something that equals that angel, that represents that angel. Maybe it's a tree, right? and maybe there's another angel, and it represented by a cow. And so I'll make these items that will represent those heavenly angelic creatures, and then that item will give me some connection, some control, right? Some ability to petition or manipulate those angelic forces. This is a very common form of magical thinking called sympathetic magic, where if I have a representation of something else, if I control the representation, I can control the something else. You're all probably much more familiar with the idea of a voodoo doll, right? That's what this is. And in essence, that's what a lot of idolatry is. It's creating a voodoo doll of God, or gods if you're a polytheist, which is creating a manipulable object that has some ability to influence or control the real power that you're trying to get to do what you want it to do. And that's a bad idea. Like, really, really bad idea. Or at least that's what the Torah seems to be telling us. Okay, so.
Since human life is precious, harmful substances must be shunned, and even really potentially dangerous agents must be avoided. This is best illustrated in the laws governing the Nazarite, the self-appointed ascetic, who must not only abstain from wine, but also from grapes, vineyards, and anything even remotely connected with the fruit of the vine.
All right, so let's make sure we got this basic concept that Akedat Yitzhak is bringing, which is if something is potentially harmful, then things that are potentially harmful should also be prohibited. Right? Well, exactly where we draw that line is a little variable depending on different circumstances, but the basic principle is sound. Right? If somebody is known to be an alcoholic, you really shouldn't be putting even beer in front of them, even if they normally would have drunk, hard liquor. You don't put that little steps in that wrong direction. And when a Nazarite would make a vow that they were not going to be drinking these intoxicating liquors, they also would refrain from the non-intoxicating components of those same liquors. So if I'm not drinking wine, I'm not drinking grape juice or even eating grapes, because I'm taking a further step back to avoid transgressing what I have vowed to avoid. Make sense? Okay. Now, taking that principle, he's going to move forward.
If this is so in the case of a Nazarite who has imposed strictures upon himself that the Torah had not even demanded of him, how much more does this concept apply to products expressly forbidden by the Torah?
Right. If I have to take an extra step because I've voluntarily chosen to prohibit something to myself, like a Nazarite, then if I am dealing with something that is obligatorily forbidden, something that is absolutely forbidden, not by my choice, but by Torah categorically, then all the more so I have to be careful that I don't get too close to transgressing that. Good? Okay.
The more serious the nature of the prohibition, the more stringent the fence around such a prohibition in order to ensure that the actual prohibition would not be violated.
Now, I had to cut out to fit onto the page, and we still ended up with a lot of words, but he gives two examples. One of them is murder, and he says not only are we prohibited from murder, we're also prohibited from getting into violent, insulting arguments with people, because that could lead to murder, right? If you get into the habit of calling someone you dirty, blah, 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 that gets you used to the idea of your blood boiling, of your passions coming up and dealing with that person. And that is a precursor towards becoming violent with someone, right? You don't go violent on someone first. You always make an initial foray of aggression in other forms. And he also uses the same example for sexual misconduct, right? There's usually some social foreplay before you get to the bedroom. And if you can cut out that social shenanigans, then you also cut out the infidelity that could happen behind closed doors. So he uses the example that, yes, sometimes you need to be a little bit more careful. And if that sounds a little weird, like the social foreplay, I'm not talking about complete separation of sexes, but I'm guessing you don't kiss your best friend, or certainly someone that you've only known for a while, the same way you kiss your spouse. Right? There's different ways to hug people of different affection levels. Maybe, or is everybody 1960s free love and you just... No, there are gradations of how we show. It doesn't mean that we each live in gender cloisters, but it does mean that how we interact, we do put little safeguards in place to prevent things from getting out of hand. Safeguards still allow for easy and free conversation and interaction in all business and friendly settings, but there is that little bit of a block to prevent it from going overboard on both of our genders. Okay.
Now, the same principle about the stringent fence around a prohibition, this principle applies to the most serious of all transgressions, the sin of worshiping idols. All other sins, especially if committed while one is under the influence of one's basic urges, can be atoned for by repentance relatively easily. This is possible when the sinner had all along retained his faith in God.
Okay, so let's make sure we understand this, especially as Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur are coming up. We all make transgressions. And most of those transgressions, he's arguing, are because we're responding to our basic urges, our Yetzer Hara, right? I couldn't resist myself. I had to have the double bacon cheeseburger, right? I saw it. The smell came through the window. You know what McDonald's does. They're always pumping that stuff out in the street. And I couldn't resist. Yeah. So imagine that's the kind of person. Then you finish it, you shove it in your mouth, and you're like, blah, 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 blah. And after you're done, you're like, why did I do that? That was so wrong of me. During that whole period, you never said, I no longer believe in God. That's why I'm having this bacon double cheeseburger. You said, I believe God, but my belief in God right now can't stop my stomach. And so I'm going to do this. Even up to including things like murder or adultery, you weren't necessarily doing it because you stopped believing in God. You were doing it because your basic urges were able to overpower you, right? I just flew off the handle. I got so angry, and the next thing I knew, I was, standing over the guy, beating him into the ground. It wasn't that I ever said, I no longer believe in God, so I think murder's okay. It was, I lost control, right? Next thing we know, we're in each other's arms. It wasn't that I stopped and said, we can only date. Hold on a second. Now that I've stopped believing in God, now we can. No, it was swept away. But idolatry is different, isn't it? Right? If we're talking about the worship of another god, then there's only so much room for a god in your mind. So that's what's going to make it especially hard.
Nowadays, however, even if someone knowingly...
But not even, just if.
Oh, I'm sorry, if some, you're right. Nowadays, if someone knowingly commits idolatry, how can such a person obtain forgiveness?
Right, because if you... To worship an idol that isn't God, like I said, some of these opinions say that with this idolatry prohibition isn't just about not worshiping our God, it's also about not worshiping other gods. If you're worshiping another God, you basically had to jettison God from your mind during that period. Right? It wasn't like I still believed in God even though I was doing something wrong. It's I stopped believing in God so I could do something wrong now. Because you can't bow down in front of an idol and still believe in God simultaneously. And it just doesn't work emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, intellectually. There's just no way for those two things to cohabit in your mind.
Therefore, the Torah includes laws which in themselves represent deterrents to the sin of idol worship. The most common form of idol worship is the adulation of heavenly objects such as the sun, the moon, and the stars. These bodies have lured people away from monotheism since time immemorial. And the Torah, therefore, does not get tired of exhorting us that you may not raise your eyes heavenward and be led astray to worship. That's in Deuteronomy.
The part we just read, in fact.
All the prophets strove to wean the Jewish people away from these tendencies and to prove to them that all these heavenly objects are merely tools which God uses in his wisdom to guide the progress of the universe.
Right. So yes, be amazed at stars, amazed at black holes, and all that kind of stuff. But don't think that's God. Right? Those are tools that God, has spun into creation, and for us to marvel at them is natural. For us to worship them is flawed. Make sense? And because it's so natural to want to worship something that is so awe-inspiring, rather than the thing that actually created the thing that's awe-inspiring, the Torah doesn't get tired of telling us over and over and over again, no idols, no idols, no idols, no idols. Good? Okay. Before we get into just a little bit of wordplay, and I lose you because this is going to be a slightly different style of philosophy, I just want to make sure we get the summary out of the way here. Right? This idolatry is excessively painful and corrosive. If you're worshiping God through a statue, or if you're worshiping another God through a statue. in both cases, you are essentially undermining the order of creation and the purpose of creation. And you are doing so for the same basic urges that make you want to eat the cheeseburger, that makes you want to sleep with somebody that isn't actually your spouse, or that makes you want to choke the life out of that guy that's annoying you, because it puts you in control. It says there are no limits. And idolatry in particular is the most insidious of all of those, because not only does it say I don't want to follow the limits, it says I make the limits, because I am in control of God. I have my voodoo doll statue, and therefore I can manipulate it to do what I want, rather than I will do what God wants of me. And that tangibility, whether it be a statue, or whether it be a stone, or whether it be a tree, or whether it be a carving, or whether it be an engraving, or whether it be of tin, all of those different things, all of that is essentially trying to put me in the driver's seat of deciding what is right and what is wrong. And once I take that seat, everything else is washed away. Everything else. Because now I can choose whether I want to be a murderer, because my God is the God of Mars, right? He's the God of war. Or my God is the God of death, and they like murder, so murder's fine. Or my God is Dionysus, right? So I can go out and I can drink and gorge and do all of that. Or my God is Aphrodite or Ishtar, so it's a fertility rite, so I can sleep with any cultic prostitute I think is pretty, and it's called worship. As soon as you take control of that object and stick God in your hands, you get to call all the shots. And once we do that, well, human society doesn't do so well. And the human spirit doesn't do so well, because we've now burned the way back, because we've rejected the whole concept of God in its totality, which is why we have undone the whole flow of creation. Right? All of creation is meant to point us towards God, not to be a barrier between us and God. And if we turn to an idol, we have turned to his creation and used it as a wall between us and God. And nothing could be more painful in all of our existence. That's why it's in the big three. Okay. To make the point just a little bit stronger, we're going to do a little bit of philosophy. And Harriet, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and read this both for time as well as for intonation.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this is from the Guide for the Perplexed. This is from Rambam. It might be thought that the Hebrew words temunah and tavnit have the same meaning. They both kind of mean form or shape, right, or image. Tavnit, derived from the word bana, which means build or he built, signifies the build and construction of a thing. That is to say, its figure, whether square, round, triangular, or any other shape. And then he brings numerous examples of how that phrase tavnit is used, including our text. In all of these, it is the shape that is referred to. Thus, Hebrew never uses the word tavnit in speaking of the qualities of God Almighty, right? Because God has no shape. Right? God isn't a square, God isn't a triangle, God isn't a block, God isn't tall, God isn't short, God isn't fat, God isn't thin. There is no shape, there's no outline to God, in the same way that there's an outline to my pen, the building, my face. Right? Those all things have a tavnit, have a form. God doesn't. Make sense? He goes on. The word temunah, on the other hand, which could be used to mean like image, is used in the Bible 3 different ways. And because it's used 3 different ways, it's easy to get confused. First, the outlines of things which are perceived by our senses. You can see how similar that would be to the shape, right? The form, the shape, it's kind of like a synonym. That is their shape, their form. Secondly, the form of our imagination, right, which is the image of something in our mind. That is to say, the impressions retained in imagination when the object have ceased to affect our senses. Rambam was very impressed by the fact that even if a chair wasn't in front of me, I can still recall the image, the temunah of a chair in my mind. Right? That chairness was still accessible by my brain. And as he points out from Job, it remained, but I could not recognize its sight. Only an image, temunah, was before my eyes. That is to say, an image which presented itself to my sight during sleep. Thirdly, the true form of an object. That is to say, temunah can also mean the real form, which is perceived only by the intellect. Your eyes have nothing to do with this. Right? This is only how your mind, your soul, at a highest level is able to understand the essence of the, in quote, shape of something that has no shape. Right? So there is a chair, and then there is chairosity, right? Or chairness. And that chairness is not perceived by my eyes or my fingers or even my posterior, right? That chairness is only understood spiritually and the essence in my mind. And that, in its third form, is the meaning of the term that is applied to God. So the words and the similitude, the timunah of the Lord shall you behold, therefore mean you will comprehend the true essence of the Lord. So any place where you see in the Bible that it says, and they saw the timunah of God, the image of God, it was never with eyeballs. Right? It was never that they saw something that was God-like. It means that when they were in that place at that time, having that experience, in their mind came a rush of understanding that allowed them to understand the essence of God that was needed at that moment for that vision, that revelation, that experience. And there's no way to draw that, not even my shaky oval. Right? I just needed to occupy a space on the board to make sure you knew what I was talking about.
Quick question. Is that similar to the distinction between knowing and understanding?
Yes, I could see that working. Right,
In Isaiah, sometimes talks about knowing and then understanding that there's not precisely the same, but they're similar.
Quite, yes, that could work. Yes, I mean, this is a different way of connecting to an object. We're so used to using just our senses that we sometimes think that's all that's going on. But real understanding comes from understanding what it is we're looking at. And when it comes to God, we don't even need the eyeballs to get us started. In fact, they are counterproductive, right? Because then we end up following our eyes and using them for the information that misleads us, rather than following our spirit and our soul, which can appeal and understand God more directly. And I knew that would be a little difficult, so that's why I put it at the end.
Hey, is the reason Maimonides was able to do a fake conversion because Islam's monotheism based on the same God?
No, that was to save his life.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
maybe at the beginning.
Oh, in terms of idolatry, yeah. Islam is not considered to be an idolatrous faith by Jewish law. There's been many things that have been done wrong in the name of Islam, but in its essence, it's not considered to be idolatrous.
And they had a trouble
In fact, I mean, Islam
with
got rid
Christianity.
of a lot of idolatry.